remembered answering the phone and I said, "Have you found her?" And he said, "I hope you're sitting down."
The homicide squad has been called in to investigate the death of a woman in Melbourne. The 24-year-old's body was discovered last night on the ground floor of a St Kilda Road apartment building.
As soon as I found out how she died, ostensibly by climbing into a garbage chute, when she was pissed.
I don't think she climbed in there by herself.
I have no idea how anybody thinks anybody could get in that thing.
She hated being caged and she was claustrophobic, so I can't see her ending her life that way.
How I usually despise men like you. Their fingering stares, wolf smiles, a swagger in their steps.
This is episode 3 of Phoebe's Fall, a podcast from the Age newsroom in Melbourne. I'm Michael Batchelard.
And I'm Richard Baker.
And we've been investigating the short life and brutal death of Phoebe Hansjuk.
The hardest thing is that she didn't want to die. She really did.
No. That's Aunt Hampel, Phoebe's partner of 18 months. What you're hearing is a secret recording Phoebe's mum Natalie made in a meeting with Ant and his parents shortly after Phoebe's death.
I got home and there was a little shrine in our bed. There was a photo of us and there was a photo of a cat. But then when I walked into the kitchen, her bag was there, her keys were there, her wallet was there. She'd never, ever, ever, ever leave the house without her bag. Because
parts of this tape were suppressed by the coroner, but we can play you some of it.
Just that monster of the alcohol, she was coping with the depression, she really was. She didn't believe anyone loved her, that was the illness, She didn't believe she was worthy of me, didn't want to burden her family anymore, that's just the disease.
In episode 2, we discussed the differing theories about how Phoebe got into the chute and whether it was something she was actually likely to ever do. We learned how the chute and garbage compactor worked, and talked about the gruesome injuries that led to her death.
But here we're going to talk about Phoebe and her intense relationships. In particular, the one with Ant.
Relationships were a big thing for her. She threw everything into them. She gave it every relationship she'd ever been in, her everything.
Phoebe was smart in terms of being able to pick up on what was going on with people, but she had this romantic in her who'd fall in love, which distorted her, like it does with all of us, distorts your judgment, doesn't it?
That's Phoebe's dad, Len, and before him, her mum, Natalie. Going through her things, Len discovered a cache of Phoebe's poems in her guitar case. They made an impression on him, both as psychiatrist and father.
I keep dreaming of him, a man I have always been drawn to but have never allowed to touch me in any way, least of all my heart. My heart, that deep place, deep, dark and unknown. How he found his way in, I do not know. Nothing else mattered. Nothing but the sound of our thudding hearts, our lungs gasping for air, pulling each other under, never once letting go.
What do you think that's about?
I think that's about Ant.
Phoebe met Aunt Hampel in mid-2009 when she was working as a receptionist at one of Melbourne's most upmarket hair salons.
Ant was in his early 40s. He was schooled at the exclusive Wesley College and worked as an events promoter. He had long been part of Melbourne's A-list.
About Aunt Hampel.
Aunt Hampel, founder and director of two of Australia's premier event management and entertainment companies.
A multi-talented and awarded event producer and entertainment
transforming
marketer.
The industry with widely published, highly successful, award-winning events and brand activations. His clients range from A-list celebrities to leading global corporations. Kylie Minogue, AC/DC,
Friends,
Michael Jackson, Nicole Kidman,
Bill Clinton,
Jamie Oliver,
Riverdance,
Paris Hilton.
Life with Ant was nothing like Phoebe had experienced before.
and being involved with the Hampels and that whole group of people. You know, they're very high flyers, you know, there's a lot of money and that kind of thing, and that's kind of the social expectation, is that you fall in line with that sort of stuff, and that was never Phoebe. So I think
that was Phoebe's brother Tom. So we know Phoebe and Ant's relationship started in 2009, and she was still living with him at the time she died in December 2010. But he wasn't the first older man she'd fallen deeply in love with, according to her old school friend Alicia Carville.
The first older boyfriend that I'm aware that she was with was when we were in year 10.
Her first boyfriend, who was also the teacher, how did that strike you? Like, from what Alicia said, it seemed to be, you know, more genuine than just an infatuation or something like that.
It definitely was. I think it was much more. Do you, Mum, think that?
Oh, absolutely. I think there was a real meeting of obviously bodies, but there was also minds, and a real appreciation, I think, of each other. And
the teacher was about 30. She was only 16.
That whole having someone older, authority person who appreciated her, I think, was huge for Phoebe.
Did it concern you at the outset, the age gap and also that relationship dynamic?
It did concern me because the ramifications were huge. I mean, how did you know which way it was going to go? And
Phoebe and the teacher made sure to change things. He went to work at another school, but for a while he lived with Phoebe at Natalie's house. Though the relationship was technically illegal, by all accounts it was a genuine one.
And he was obviously very special in her life and was there for a very long time and shaped her into the person that she was as well. It was a very loving, stable relationship for many years.
Rich, we know that after Phoebe and the teacher broke up, she ended up in another long-term relationship with an older man, this time a musician and actor.
Yeah, her grandmother Jeanette mentioned that she was perhaps approval-seeking, but maybe there's something in her DNA.
For me, it was very frightening to see the similarities in the way that her life unfolded, it in so much as it almost completely mirrored my own life. I had a relationship with a teacher at the same age as she did, a much older man again. Phoebe's father was 14 years older than I was. Mum's partner was 11 years older than her. I think there was a pattern of us as women that came down the line, and Phoebe was, I think she carried on with that. I think she was always...
Family tradition or not, Phoebe's parents are in no doubt that she was aware of her effect on men and the problems it could cause.
But can you? Men of all ages, countries, states come to see me, ask my name, each with the same curiosity of wanting to know more of what they know nothing about. You are so mysterious, they say. Tell me what you are feeling. Recently, I have been reminded of my own power, the fierceness of it and its ability to create or destroy. Once I fought it, but now I'm beginning to realise that in doing that, I'm denying the very essence of who I am.
She's clearly aware of her power over men in those things.
Yeah. And, you know, most gorgeous women have that, but I think they deny it quite often. It's always been that way, you know, the Mata Haris of the world. Cleopatra, you know. Cleopatra destroyed an empire.
I think that fact that the men were so much older than her and she was very young and very beautiful, I think it caused some jealousy problems in the relationships. And the men that she went out with would often, I'm sure, feel like, how long were they going to keep her for? How long was it going to last? I don't know, that's just...
Rich, it's fair to say that Ant Hampel was different from any of the other guys Phoebe had gone for.
He's way different. Phoebe's other boyfriends were grungy muso types, the sort of guys happy to down a few beers at the front bar of the local pub, whereas Ant was more your opening night champagne and canapes kind of guy. He knew all of Melbourne's movers and shakers. For all that, though, Phoebe's family had no real objection to him, even if none of them thought he was the one. He even helped Phoebe's brother Tom get a job.
Just certainly held nothing against Ant from the get-go, and he seemed like a perfectly nice guy and everything. I didn't necessarily think he was the right person for Phoebe. I think they were very different people. They come from very different backgrounds and maybe very different values, but then...
So, Michael, things between Phoebe and Ant moved pretty fast from their first meeting in the middle of 2009.
Yeah, Phoebe moved into the Valencia apartment with Ant just a few months later, in early 2010.
She paid him regular rent from the money she earned at her part-time job at a marketing company owned by one of Ant's friends.
This has always struck me as a bit strange. She was described at the inquest as both girlfriend and tenant, and there was some evidence that this made her feel uneasy in the relationship, and was certainly distressing to Len, her father.
Then when the police found her body, he said, it's my flatmate. Disowned her. No? I found that offensive.
But the upshot was that while a lot of Phoebe's friends were still living in cramped share houses, she was living in one of the city's most luxurious apartment buildings.
Yeah, it was. It was quite large and expensive. It was all marble or glass or...
That's Shelley Tonkin, the couple's cleaner.
It was quite labour intensive. Everything needed cleaning and then polishing. It had a white carpet, which Ant and I used to fret over keeping clean. And Ant was there by himself when I started, and then after a while Phoebe moved in. I'm not too sure how long. I thought she was a bit young for the role. It seemed to be a very grown-up place for a 24-year-old.
Even though Phoebe was living in the apartment and paying her way, her family felt there was little to show her presence there.
If you went into the house, there was no sign of her anywhere. She was always writing, always, painting, drawing, doing... There was nothing, there was nowhere for her to do any of that. There were some photographs of she and Ant, but that was about it.
How do you interpret that?
Well, because he wanted the apartment to look a certain way. And she was a really hippie kind of bohemian type of girl who was really arty, and she'd been living there for a while. And she said, my things are still locked up downstairs. And
Grandmother Jeanette also sensed Phoebe was uncomfortable in her own home.
Walking into the apartment, the whole thing had this controlled air, like everything had a place. And I went there on one occasion, and it was just after breakfast, and she'd left her cup up on the thing, and we sat down, and she said, I'll just put that away. And so she got up. It was as though we couldn't have anything out of place, and you're right.
Rich, obviously we're only hearing one side of the story here in terms of the apartment and how it looked. You asked to talk to Aunt Hampel months ago, but you didn't get a positive reaction.
Yeah, that's right. I decided on an old school approach, so I wrote Ant a letter and explained why we were doing this podcast. I was really hoping he'd join me for a totally off-the-record cup of coffee so we could talk further. I think it's really important to hear from him because, as we know, the coroner exonerated him of any involvement, and I just felt this podcast would be a lot better with his input.
But instead all we got was a letter from his lawyer. Anyway, what it all means is that other than the transcript of Ant's evidence at Phoebe's inquest, all we have of him is parts of that secret recording Natalie made in the days after Phoebe's death.
I don't have any guilt, I don't have any blame, and I'm lucky like that, and I didn't find her, and I don't ever want to know what happened.
That's Ant telling Natalie how he had no guilt and no idea what happened to Phoebe.
I know I did everything, and I know she tried to do everything, and she doesn't blame anybody. It's just a illness that no one understands.
Rich, I got to say, making a secret recording of your dead daughter's de facto is a pretty extreme move.
Yeah, but the homicide squad had pretty much written off Phoebe's death as a suicide, and Ant and his family were telling people the same thing. Natalie didn't believe it, and she had some questions for him.
I had been unable to speak with Ant by himself since Phoebe had died. The reason given was that he was too grief-stricken and he wasn't able to speak with us as a family. I felt upset about that because I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, we're her family, her parents. If we can get it together to talk with him, why on earth can't he be man enough to come and, to speak with us?
Natalie and Len's first attempt at talking to Ant didn't go well. His apartment was full of his friends, and Ant was in such a state that he couldn't even come out of his bedroom to see Phoebe's parents. He was undergoing some form of hypnotic therapy instead.
Amidst the chaos, Ant's mother and another family friend who ran a high society catering company got in Natalie's ear.
She and Aunt's mum was sort of talking to me about funeral arrangements and how they wanted to do some big thing down maybe on the beach. You know, they were saying, you know, they were telling me what it needed to be. It needed to be beautiful. There needed to be lots of flowers. There needed to be this and that. And I was feeling as though I was about to vomit. So I said, I think I just got to go. I'm not ready to talk about this. I can hardly believe that my daughter's dead.
So Natalie left flustered and dissatisfied. She sent Ant a text asking to talk when he felt up to it.
So I got a message back inviting me to come to the apartment on Tuesday, where I assumed I'd be able to speak with Ant alone. And I got a call from my dad, and he said, "Are you going to the Hampel's apartment?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, do yourself a favour and get yourself a recorder. Record the whole thing." Which I thought was a bit drastic at the time.
The old detective
still at work. And he said, "Look, there's likely to be a lot of things said there today." And he said, "You'll struggle to remember them because of the state that you're in." And he said, "But just get it down." Ant was not alone at all. His father was there, George Hampel, and his wife Felicity Hampel, and his mother Sue Owen. So there were three of them, and I was by myself.
It was pretty intimidating company. Ant's father George is one of Victoria's most prominent former Supreme Court judges. Felicity is a county court judge.
So Ant was sitting on the couch and he was sobbing and just sort of staring into space. He didn't look me in the eye once for the entire time that I was there. And we just had a conversation, really. I asked him things about, just things that were puzzling me, and how did she seem that morning?
That's all I wanted to know. She was so peaceful when I left her. She had a little eye mask on. She was cuddled up to Yoshi, and I didn't wake her.
It's a bit hard to hear, but that's Ant recalling how Phoebe and her dog Yoshi were sleeping peacefully on the morning of her death.
Ant and Phoebe's relationship had its happy points, particularly when they were able to get to his father's and stepmother's farm near Bells Beach on Victoria's surf coast. But for much of 2010, their relationship was fraying and growing ever more volatile.
According to her family, Phoebe thought about leaving the relationship, and she was worried that Ant would pop the question to her on a trip to Paris they were due to take that Christmas. This is Phoebe's father, Len.
From the beginning of that year, she was struggling with Ant because I think she really loved the guy, but knew that that's not what she wanted. But he had trouble sort of letting her go, which I could imagine. I was really horrified when I thought she might marry him, because it was like stepping into a straitjacket.
Phoebe's brother Tom says she confided in him about her relationship struggles with Ant in the weeks leading up to her death.
They'd sort of broken up a couple of times, and there'd been sort of, these falling outs. I think she was more just at that point of how do I get out of this situation that I'm in now?
If anyone in 2010 had a front row seat when it came to Phoebe and Ant's relationship, it was Vanessa Levin. She'd been extremely close to Ant for 20 years. Phoebe and Vanessa became the best of friends. Vanessa didn't want to speak to us for this podcast series, but she did make some telling remarks to the coroner about the state of Phoebe and Ant's relationship.
I remember saying to her, you need to lay everything on the table, and if you're not going to agree on something, I think that maybe you should finish it.
We asked the coroner for the tapes of his hearing, but he denied the request, so we got someone to read Vanessa's examination from the transcript instead. Here's the counsel assisting the coroner, asking her a question.
What was her worry as at that date?
That Ant was quite controlling, and that although she knew he loved her, she felt that she didn't have a voice in the relationship.
Michael, one thing that struck me in the course of doing interviews with Phoebe's friends is that none of them actually spent any time with her when she was with Ant. It was like that part of her life no longer existed.
Her friend, Bren Hessian, for instance, had been very close to her before Ant came along.
We lived in the same neighbourhood. We used to catch up every few weeks. Yeah, just hang out, get drunk, talk about life, and talk about our dreams, all that sort of stuff. But there was quite some time, it was 18 months possibly, where we hadn't caught up. We'd text and keep in touch, but she were hooked up with Ant and a whole different group, circle of friends, and we kind of drifted a little bit. And that was a clear cut of Ant saying, right, no more of these old friends, and moving on.
Under Ant's influence, her appearance changed too. She cut her hair short and dyed it darker. Phoebe's grandmother, Jeanette, felt that she ended up looking like a younger version of Ant's glamorous sister, Christina Hampel, known as Chrissy.
Example was if she felt like going out and, looking casual and everything, she would, but that changed as well. There was a mould, I think, that she felt she had to fit, and Chrissy used to lend her clothes. I didn't know anything about this, but on one occasion we were meeting and Phoebe said, I've got to go to the dry cleaners. Want to come with me? And I said, sure. What are you going to a dry cleaners? Yeah, I've got to pick up one of Chrissy's really special gowns that I borrowed. And when we got to the dry cleaning shop, I was actually stunned because I knew I was looking at a garment worth a lot of money. And I said to Phoebe, how does someone get to buy one of these? And she said, well, Chrissy doesn't work, but she's great the way she lends me clothes and things. And then we were walking along and she said, look, you must promise not to say anything. Chrissy deals in cocaine, and I've just got to keep that to myself. I can't. But that's how she gets all these great clothes. And for me, it was just horrendous in terms of, I thought, what has she got herself into here?
Chrissy Hampel's an interesting one. She was charged by police in 2014 after a secret camera installed in her home captured her selling bags of cocaine.
Yeah, she pleaded guilty later that year to dealing the drug and possessing a prohibited weapon, which was a canister of tear gas.
But even so, she got a pretty easy run in court.
She sure did. She wasn't given a criminal conviction, and the magistrate, Franz Holzer, said he took into account her guilty plea and, I quote, embarrassment to her family.
Chronic depression. Depression episodically since her teenage years. Problematic alcohol abuse and drug use. Poor self-concept, self-doubt, difficulty discovering direction and in creating a satisfying life.
That was part of a report to the coroner from Joanna Young, a psychologist Phoebe was seeing in the year before her death. We approached her to talk to us, but she declined. Phoebe told the psychologist that drinking was still a big problem, but she also confided that she had taken to using cocaine from time to time.
Michael, you've got to wonder where a part-time clerical worker like Phoebe got the money to buy cocaine. It sells for at least $300 a gram in Melbourne. But maybe she didn't have to buy it. Maybe someone gave it to her.
Well, Ant Hampel was adamant when he told the coroner that he had never seen Phoebe taking illicit drugs.
Well, OK, so if we accept what Ant said is true, and there's no evidence to the contrary, that leaves his sister Chrissy as a possibility. And there's no doubt others in Phoebe's circle also could have supplied her. Anyway, as well as booze and drugs still being a problem for Phoebe, the other big factor on her mental state was, according to her psychologist, her relationship with Ant.
This is what Joanna Young said in cross-examination at Phoebe's inquest.
She had told me that she was unhappy, that she felt her partner's attitude, which was that nothing was right for him, that she said, when I try to be me, it's not right for him. She felt that he put her down and behaved rudely to her in public, makes her feel that she's wrong or stupid, that he is defensive and aggro is what I've written. Aggressive. When she says anything, which she rarely does, she feels she can't assert herself and feels taken for granted, and that she is unhappy in the relationship, that Ant's attitude is making her miserable.
Phoebe and her psychologist worked on a plan to reduce her drinking. It seemed to work for a while, but then she'd relapse and the cycle would begin again.
But right up until Phoebe's final week, the psychologist was of the view that Phoebe was not suicidal and was only mildly depressed.
When Phoebe was feeling depressed, she would often look to get away from Melbourne.
In October 2010, 2 months before Phoebe died, she had a big bust-up with Ant. She went to Malakuta to spend time with Jeanette, her grandmother and confidant.
For a time, it seemed as if Phoebe had made up her mind to stay in Mallacoota. She'd even lined up a summer job at the golf club. Jeanette believes Phoebe was going to break up with Ant, but she told her she should go back to Melbourne and do it properly.
When she was here, and she'd been here for a couple of days, I felt that she started to feel stronger. But she'd said, oh, well, maybe I'll just stay here and won't go back. And one of my big regrets is that I actually said to her, Phoebe, a lot of this whole stuff is repetition. You don't end things well and then you feel bad about it. So in this instance, I think having the courage to go back, tell Ant and come straight back.
Phoebe took Jeanette's advice and went back to Ant, but then she seemed to change her mind about leaving him. However, an email to her mum, Natalie, suggests she wanted to keep all her options open.
She said, I've been thinking about my 21st present, and I'd like you to hang on to that for me, for there may be a time in my life that I need to get away without much notice, and I'd like to have an international flight available for me. I also ask that you don't mention anything of this to anyone, and I won't bring it up again until I need it.
As the spring of 2010 turned to summer, Phoebe and Ant's relationship remained rocky. After October, she'd left him one or two more times, only to return a few days later. You get the picture from Natalie how some of those arguments might have gone.
And she was gentle and she was smart and she was all those things, but if you crossed her, look out, because she really, really came out up fighting. She wouldn't lie down and take too much. Obviously, it was getting to, without us realising, it was probably getting to that stage. She needed to get out, and she's trying to get out, and he, for whatever reason, persuaded her to come back.
After Phoebe's death, Len found another poem in her guitar case. To him, it spoke powerfully of the intensity of her final relationship.
Perhaps all you needed was a form of flattery, which I gave to you without hesitation. I should have known, thrown it in your face, how I usually despise men like you. Their fingering stares, wolf smiles, the swagger in their steps. I find that once I peel the layers off, there's nothing much left to hold. Only an emptiness, a sense of nothingness, and somehow I, as your better half, are left to scrape all the pieces together, make you whole. I will not serve.
Next time on Phoebe's Fall.
The first thing you do is you find out where's the CCTV. Get it now before some bastard destroys it.
Things were lost, and there's no doubt about that.
There was that really strange text message from Phoebe, which personally I don't think she constructed.
I really didn't know what to make of it. It didn't ring true.
My first reaction was, she's in trouble.
If you found any of the material in this podcast disturbing, you can call Lifeline or Beyond Blue if you're in Australia, or your local crisis service.
Phoebe's Fall is presented by Richard Baker and Michael Batchelard, with additional reporting by Nick McKenzie. Production by Tom McKendrick and Tim Young. The consulting producers are Julie Pizzetti and Siobhan McHugh. Matt Absalom Wong manages web development for the series, and our production assistants are Jake Evans and Lucy Dean. Audience development support from Daewee Cook and Michael Schlechter. Our executive producer is Michael Batchelard. You can see extra features for this series at theage.com.au/Phoebe's Fall, and while you're there, subscribe to The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald for access to the best investigations, news exclusives, commentary and more. To sign up, go to theage.com.au or smh.com.au and click subscribe.